Hi everyone, I'm making this video today to discuss the issue of Britain possibly leaving the EU. The exit polls are saying that it looks like there's going to be a leave vote. All I can say is that this isn't my experience of being out on the streets campaigning, where 8 out of 10 people I've spoken to have said that they want to stay in because commonly they feel this isn't the right time for us to leave, and I do agree with them. I don't think now is the right time for us to leave. I think the issue of Britain joining the EU in the first place, I think it probably was treasonous, and it was not good for Britain when we first joined. Decimalisation took money out of people's pockets, and also there was a massive increase in prices. However, that said, we've now been how many years, decades, as part of the EU, and it's become an integral feature of our society. The EU provides lots of fundings for community and social projects. The EU provides subsidies for farmers and lots of other small businesses. There are a lot of small businesses in Britain that depend on the freedom of travel within the EU. The EU upholds our human rights and children's rights. The EU courts regularly are providing justice to thousands of British people every year who've had their human rights breached under British governments and their courts, and those people have won their cases and received compensation and justice as a resource. Now, all of these things are what we're going to be leaving, and everybody's talking to me about sovereignty. You see, the people that want to stay, that's what I'm reading on Twitter. They're out in full force today, talking about sovereignty. Well, I would like somebody to explain to me, because none of them have, exactly what sovereignty is. What is sovereignty if we have no human rights? Now, we know Cameron wants to scrap our human rights. And Cameron's saying he wants to stay in the EU, and we know that's a pack of lies. He's playing devil's advocate. They all are. All the Tories are playing, a lot of them who've come out saying, oh, we want to stay, we're voting stay. They're liars. They're playing devil's advocate. We know we're governed by a set of criminals and liars. And he's telling a big lie of his life now, saying he wants to stay in the EU, when we know he wants to leave. Because if he didn't want to leave, he wouldn't have set this referendum up at such short notice. And he's been playing the immigration card like nobody's business, and all the media have joined forces. And that seems to be the majority influence on people's minds right now, and that's what the debate of staying in or leaving the EU, it's been reduced to immigration. Now, one thing I'd say about immigration is that if people think leaving the EU will see a decrease in immigration, I think they're wrong. Because what will happen is the shortfall will be made up by increased immigration from the Commonwealth countries. I might be wrong, but we shall see. According to this article, that's what Cameron's been promising. An increase in immigration from non-EU countries. So, you know, Cameron wants us to leave the EU. That's the truth of it. He doesn't want us to stay, because he knows very well that if we stay in the EU, there's absolutely no way that he can scrap human rights. Now, apparently, he is supporting Turkey's entrance into the EU. And Turkey is having trouble getting into the EU. Why? Because it's not reaching, as a nation, the standards of democracy and human rights and justice that is required to stay in the EU. And in fact, the way Britain is operating right now, I'm surprised that Europe hasn't kicked Britain out of the EU. Because our human rights record at the moment is appalling. It's appalling. And so what's going to happen? What are we going to lose? Britain's is going to be an isolated nation. We're not going to be able to get on a plane and pop off to France or Spain or Germany or Holland. You're going to have to get a visa. And how easy is it going to? Are visas going to be granted to British people who already have a really bad reputation throughout Europe? How easy is it going to be for us to get visas out there? So, for the majority of people in Britain, travel outside of Britain is going to be no. That's how it's going to be. So that means no job prospects in Europe for British people. Because just as migrants come here, migrants leave Britain every year as well to work and live in the EU. That option's going to be closed. We're going to be left with a government that will then be free to scrap human rights. And that will be the forerunner of making 80% of Britain poor on their plan, which is part of their plan to return Britain to Victorian Britain. And the thing is that Victorian Britain is not allowed to be a member of the EU, you see, because the EU will not accept a Victorian-style nation. That's why Turkey is having trouble getting in. Now, this young lady here, she's got learning difficulties and she got pregnant, and social services decided that as soon as her baby was born, they were going to take that baby. They made moves they went to court, they made arrangements to remove her baby at birth. Because that's what social services do in Britain. Go onto YouTube, look at the videos of screaming babies being forcibly removed from screaming mothers by police and social services on the grounds that mother's got a learning difficulty or she's postnatally depressed, or she was abused as a child, or she was in care as a child. Yes, that is what's happening. Now, she was able to flee to Spain, and she's proven to actually be a perfectly capable mother, and the council have now decided that she can keep her daughter. But if she did not have the option of fleeing to Spain, that little girl would never have known her mother. She would have been handed over to strangers. Strangers who are unregulated mostly. And nobody checks on the children once they've been forcibly adopted. Now, people are talking to me, again, about sovereignty. Well, what is sovereignty when a woman, a mother, cannot keep her child? When social services have a right to remove children, newborn babies, from their mother. And they're getting paid £1,800 a week for every child on their books as cared for. And now Cameron's brought in a 26-week limit of forced adoption, so on being taken into care, the child needs to be forcibly adopted within 26 weeks. So that means child is taken off social worker books, who before that were usually on their books for a year. So that's £1,800 a week for a year for each child they take. Now that's been cut in half. So they're going to have to take twice as many children, aren't they? Because they are privatised, profit-driven organisations now. And I do think that Britain really, really needs to wake up, because, you know, what is sovereignty? When a government's authorities has powers to cut a baby out of its mother's womb and forcibly adopt that baby to someone. The mother never sees the baby. She wakes up to find a baby has gone from her belly. You know, and that's what they did to an Italian lady who came to Britain on a training course at Ryanair, and she had a panic attack. And that is what they did. They sectioned her, and then they did a forced cesarean. They didn't even tell her about it. She woke up, she was put to sleep, she woke up, her baby was gone. It must be 4 years later, she still hasn't ever seen her child. So, you know, I ask again, what is sovereignty? What is sovereignty when you've got no human rights? Now, I'll leave you the link to this article, and I really advise you to read it. Because this is not about immigration. And personally, I'd rather have immigration and the freedom myself to migrate and move about through Europe, and my human rights, than have no immigrants and no human rights. Because to me, human rights are my sovereignty. If I haven't got human rights, what is my sovereignty? And we've barely got our human rights now. So what is it going to be like when we leave Europe? And why haven't we got our human rights now? It's because nobody's fighting for them. Nobody's really standing up for them. And that's why people in Britain, thousands of people in Britain, are forced every year to turn to the EU courts for justice, because Britain is not delivering justice. Central London authorities harbour a deadly paedophile ring that do act in gangs and groups to sexually abuse children and traffic and kill babies. They're reported as eating as well. And we know that is happening because of 2 child witnesses, medical evidence, and now the fact that they have worked so hard to cover it all up. And that case has gone before the EU courts because justice was not given to those 2 child witnesses. And why? Why try to cover that up by denying justice to children, blatantly denying justice to children? Why do that if there's nothing to cover up? You see? Because you don't have to cover something up where there's no crime, do you? But when you refuse to investigate a crime and arrest criteria is fully satisfied, well then we do have to start asking questions, don't we? When those crimes involve members of the police, social services and CAFCAS, the family court. We need to wake up and understand that this issue of leaving Europe is not about immigration. It's got nothing to do really with immigration, because there's no guarantee that immigration will be less just because we've left the EU. And as I say, according to this article, Cameron's promised the opposite. What we're leaving are our human rights, and that to me is our sovereignty. Now, if Europe were planning to scrap human rights, I would be the first one to say let's leave. But instead it's our own government that's planning to scrap human rights. A government that's in on what all the evidence points to, a very dodgy election. And that is a government that wants to deny our sovereignty as human beings. My sovereignty is as a human being. And what sovereignty have we got right now anyway? We've got mere shreds of it. And I say, hold on to what you have, because to those who have, more shall be given. And to those who have not, even that little bit which they have shall be taken away. Now you remember those words, because they are wise words and they are truth. And it's not a prophecy, it's action and reaction. You build on what you've got. And if you can't build on what you've got, then you're going to lose even what little bit you have. And we've got a few rights now, and we need to hold on to them. And we do need to hold on to them for the sake of the children, the child. And what hope have they got? What future have they got? Because the only people really that want Britain out of the EU are the Zionist bankers who are using Britain as a horrible, corrupt financial centre that controls the global finances. And, you know, that is what we need to address. And I think, yes, the EU's corrupt, EU Parliament's corrupt, just as every British Parliament's corrupt, American Parliament's corrupt. They're all corrupt. We know that. We're being governed. It's a global cabal. Gordon Duff explained it in Veterans Today. It's a global criminal cabal that's controlling every nation through finance. We know that. That's what we're up against. So yes, there is corruption in Europe, but there's also a lot of good people in power in Europe. And just as there are a lot of good people in power in Britain, and we all need to stick together now. We need to stick together, because that's what we need, is unity. And these corrupt people want to drive us apart, because that's always their strategy of divide and rule. And don't let them use their fascist agendas of immigration, using the fact that people are so poor they've had to flee their nations in order to be able to get a living. If we don't like it, help the countries to build a stable economy so they don't have to leave. But no, they don't. They feed off trouble upon trouble upon trouble that they create. They create the kind of poverty and wars that drive immigration, and then they blame the immigrants, and now they want to use that for us to divide. And as I say, don't talk to me about sovereignty when this British mother would not have been allowed to keep her child if she did not have the freedom to flee to Spain. So, think again before you go out and vote today. Think about what you're really going to be giving up if you vote leave.